Welcome to the Power Hour. I'm your host, Eugene Schatzman. We've got a great show for you today. Please make sure that you're subscribed and getting updates every time an episode comes out. So I ask for your feedback on the show regularly. And by the way, thank you to everyone who's reached out on the Power Hour website or on eugeneschatzman.com. I really appreciate it. And one of the things that I've heard from that feedback is that our listeners would like to hear from some real world experiences, to hear from real ODs and owners. And I've promised to do just that for you. So this season, I plan to bring on owners at various parts of their career and with various challenges and various accomplishments. And today, I'm very excited to kick it off with this panel. So today, I interviewed two great doctors and just two fantastic humans, Dr. Aaron Law from Innovative Eye Care, now part of Eyecare Specialties, and Dr. Ryan Stybel from Positive Ions and Look Optometry. Both of these gentlemen graduated together, and they're both 15 years into their careers. They've both built impressive practices and are hungry for growth. Full disclosure, both practices have been Power Practice clients and National Strategic clients. So they've been on a bit of an accelerated growth path. But while there's a lot of similarities in what they've learned over the years, they also have quite a few differences. For example, Dr. Law practices in a rural community. Dr. Stybel sees patients in Los Angeles. Dr. Law recently sold and joined a larger group. Dr. Stybel bought a second location and expanded his first one in recent years. My favorite part of the show is that these guys have so many insights to share with their former selves that we can all learn from. We talk about staff, we talk about metrics, patient experience, negotiating for an office, transitioning from a previous owner, and integrating subspecialties. We also talk about some mistakes. So before we jump in, again, I just want to say my goal is for the Power Hour to be the best possible resource for you. Please share your feedback, questions, or just reach out if you'd like to connect. To do that, you can go to eugeneschatzman.com or the Power Hour website, drop me a line. And now, let's go to today's show with a front row seat into Aaron and Ryan's journeys. All right, Dr. Aaron Law and Dr. Ryan Stybel, welcome to the Power Hour. Excited to have you guys both on.
Thank you, Eugene. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so the reason I'm so excited to chat with you guys is that I think you can add so much value to our listeners today by just talking through your story and your learnings along the way. I think the two of you guys are in a position that is going to appeal to a lot of the folks who are listening to the show. And what's interesting is there's a lot of similarities in your story, and there's also a lot of differences. And I think that it's really going to be interesting to try to tease out kind of the different routes you guys went, but also the similarities that you guys had. But, you know, I think maybe the easiest way to start the conversation today is to have you guys tell your story. And I know you guys both graduated at the exact same time in 2008. So you're about 15 years or so into owning your practices and being in or being part of private practice. And it's and I think it would be good. Again, there's a rural component. There's an urban component. There's the types of patients that you serve. There's so many interesting nuances with the way that each of you built your practices. But I think I'd love for you guys to tell your story and maybe just summarize the last 15 years or so. Aaron, why don't we have you start?
Yeah, happy to. And Eugene, thank you again for having me on today. Kind of excited. Haven't done this before, so it should be a good time. But
oh yeah.
So if I look back, 2008, as you said, Ryan and I graduated from NECO from New England, and had a great 4 years. Traveled around for our externships, our fourth year. And being from Kansas, went to the University of Kansas. One of my goals was to get back to the Midwest. And so my wife and I, who was also an optometrist and is an optometrist, but classmate as well, moved out to Kansas City. And I think like a lot of new grads, like you really don't know where to start. You're just so new. You don't who to network with. You have no idea. None of the good jobs are ones that you really readily hear about. So I just needed to get my foot in the door. And so I worked for a practice for about a year before hearing of a really, really good opportunity. And I sat down with the owner of a single doctor practice, kind of in a little bit smaller town, which was one of my goals, to be not in a metro, but near a metro. And so I was lucky to land a good spot. And over probably 6 months time, we negotiated and ended up buying the practice in late 2010. So it was when I took over. Um, he and I worked for about a year together, and then he retired, and I was a solo doctor. I had a few part-time docs work for me on the weekends, but really about the equivalent of about 5 doctor days a week. Um, so fast forward again all the way up to 2019. I bought the building at that point that my practice was in, which was a big milestone, something that I'd been looking forward to as well. And then again, being a solo doc, you do kind of get a little bit lonely. And so one of my goals also was to actually try to buy into or become a partner into a bigger practice. And so in 2021, I sold my office and bought in as a partner into a 5 location practice now. We have 5 partners, and it's nice having a little bit more camaraderie and people to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah. Okay. So, and just describe for me the community that you built your practice in, because I think it's important for the audience to get a sense of what Belton, Missouri really looks like.
Yeah. So Belton, Missouri, when I first got into town in 2010, probably had about 2 stoplights.
Okay.
And yeah, so maybe 21,000 people at that time. Maybe we're up to 24, 25,000 max on a busy day.
It's a hot spot.
Yeah, and we got a few more stoplights, and but some big stores have started to come in. So we have like the Menards and the Lowe's and a few department stores, things like that. A lot of fast food chains. But it's funny because it's still very rural, but people that are more rural consider us the city. So it's still a small town feel. But again, like I said, about 30 minutes from a big metro area of Kansas City.
Yeah, so it's kind of like it's almost like a little bit of a destination for probably some of the farm field communities around
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
but
for
it's
sure.
also still pretty farm field, if I'm assuming correctly from the
Yeah,
way
we're,
that
we're not we're not too far out there, but there's a little bit of an urban feel starting to come to town.
I gotcha. Great, got it. Ryan, let's shift to your story of again graduated in 2008, and
Yeah, and I always wanted to get out to California. I grew up in Michigan, cold. I was not a fan of the snow and the months of cold and gray. Did our optometry school in Boston. That was fun, and so I just packed in my car and drove across the country. And on my way out there, 2 of my friends who were already living in California had walked into the practice that I was eventually going to take over, and met the owner and introduced themselves and said, "Our buddy's coming out here. He's looking for a job, and like we need somebody." So it was kind of just fate, the right timing. So when I moved out here, I started working there in another office, and then I was very fortunate. About 5 months, the owner was leaving to take over another practice outside the city, and seller financed it to me. I was very fortunate. It was 2008 when the economy was not doing too well. Banks were giving money out. But I took it over. It was small. It was 1 exam lane, so it was just myself, and then was able to grow it. About 5 years later, remodeled, added a second exam lane, brought an associate. In 2018, I purchased my second practice, which is in a completely different area, only about 20 miles away, but might as well be another state in California. And then last year, we bought real estate and moved our original practice to a new location, doubled our footprint and square footage, added another associate about 2 months ago. So it's good. We're growing, we're having fun, and um, love being a private practice doctor.
yeah, and you're just for the audience, you're in LA, right? Like it's no joke. Like when you say 20 miles away is like another state, like that's probably, if I shift to Belton, Missouri, that's like to Kansas City and back is to go to like Ryan's other practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
From yeah. Um, so I want you each to just describe the types of practices that you build. What is the focus? What's the look and feel of the practice? Give me just maybe like a quick 2-minute summary of what you built and why you built it that way, from a patient experience standpoint.
Yeah. So with our practice, and as I first got into it, like you kind of don't really know. Um, what to do yet. You're kind of first in the door. You got to see patients. You try to learn the business side of things, and and especially once I started with power practice, like for us, it was the customer service experience that took over. We tried to make it very easy to be a patient in our practice. We tried to make it very streamlined and easy from the moment they call and the moment they check in to the exam to check out to everything that you want to go perfectly. And I think that's what we quickly became known for in our community as well, especially in comparison to some of the other practices at that time that were around. We heard, I've never had an exam like this before, and you guys are so nice. And, and one of the things that we always did to our new patients is we gave them a rose as a thank you when they checked out.
Hmm.
And we did that for a decade, and until COVID happened, and then we couldn't do that anymore. So, but that's the small town feel, and that's what we wanted to give back to our community.
So do you have like a agreement with a local florist? You just have roses
We had a big
delivered
flower
every day?
bill every single month. So
Nice. Nice. Okay. And it's interesting because we've talked about the experience economy on the show before, and it sounds like you definitely embrace that. So it sounds like high tech, high friendliness. Was it?
yeah.
How would you describe your optical? Was it higher end?
Now in our community, I would not say it's high end, but it's definitely mid to kind of mid high. Frames probably maxing out in the fours, and I imagine that's where Ryan's frames probably start. So not
Yeah.
quite high end, but we serviced a lot of different types of individuals and people that came in for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, what would you say ballpark? I mean, you can give me a range of revenue per patient.
Yeah. So my goal is always shooting for about 500, just on an average.
Sure. Okay. And okay, Ryan. So over to you. You're in LA.
Yeah.
Describe the practice. Describe the field, and certainly the most recent one, because obviously you've been working towards the same vision the whole time. So talk a little bit about that.
So the beginning was always retail oriented, high end frame lines, getting patients in to just come in. The eye exam was the secondary part of why people came to our office. They would come in to buy glasses, see our frame lines because we definitely had a lot more frames than a lot of other offices in the area, and then started to build a practice on technology and the customer service. Our practice always had a bar in it, so they'd come in. It was like a neighborhood feel. They'd sit down, they'd see their neighbors, and we'd always throw parties and have wine and cheese, and just made it a good experience for patients. But it was always driven on retail and glasses, and then was able to then shift it into building specialties within the practice and adding technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And average revenue per patient range.
Over 600. So, and it's starting to grow more now as we add a lot more dry eye treatments. So, as of this last quarter, we're at 750 a patient.
Okay. Great. And congratulations, by the way. So it sounds to me okay. So now we've established the ground. We'll call it the foundation. So our listeners know where you guys are coming from. So now we're going to get into some of the actionable stuff. And I think maybe let's back up and say, okay, so somebody who's looking to buy a practice today, and it's a little bit of a different environment than it was, by 2008, 2009 was an odd time to start a business, and, even in the few years shortly after. And you probably could get some deals. And today, maybe not as much. But what advice would you give to someone who's looking to buy a practice today, who's looking to potentially take over a practice from somebody who's nearing retirement?
Yeah. So I guess if I start here, what I would think of is what I did myself is the moment I got into town, any meeting I could go to, I went. If I saw a group of people sitting and talking that looked like they, know what they're doing, they've been in town for a while, they've been working in Kansas City, anywhere in town for a while, I'd want to be a part of that group and just listen and introduce myself and let them know what I was looking for, and just start networking as much as possible.
You're saying optometry meetings. You're not going to like
Yeah,
BNIs.
yeah. No, yeah, optometry meetings, little
Yep.
CE events and things like that. So I would start there. And then something else that I probably really didn't do well until 2 to 3 years after having my office was really think about why I even wanted to have it, like what my vision, what my mission was, what I wanted to provide for our patients. And I think had I done it differently, I probably even before having the office would have started building that framework in my mind in terms of what do I want this to look like. That way I can hire the right people and bring them in under right understanding with a common goal. And I think first couple of years we were just kind of carrying the legacy of the previous doctor's mission statement, and I had no connection with it. So I probably would have redone that a little bit earlier.
So meaning you feel like you should have changed more, but you didn't necessarily change that much.
Yeah, yeah, early on. Yep. So it probably took 3 or 4 years really to change the name. But again, you want some name recognition before you just go flip the lights and now you're this new company that nobody knows. So
Sure,
yep.
sure. Ryan, what do you think? What advice would you give to someone who's buying a practice? And also, I mean, in your case, did you keep the staff?
Yes, great question. So we did keep the staff, the good ones at least. Not kidding. We did keep the staff because I think that was huge. Just like Aaron said, you know, especially in a town feel, if you come in and change everything, some might rub some people the wrong way. In
Yep.
our new office, people actually have commented. Most people say they like it, but some people come in like, I like the last pace. It was smaller. I knew everybody was there. Now you have new staff, and some people just they don't like change, and so that's you definitely keep the same staff if you can, and then investing in technology. Hopefully, if you're taking out a loan, you can wrap some of those things into it because you want to better the place. People come in when they see things that are new, they're going to like that. They're going to enjoy it. They're going to see that you're investing in technology and bettering their eye exam. And then I would say picking a specialty. And that's been one of the biggest things that's helped us grow is I specialize in dry eye, so we invest in dry eye technology. We have a associate that specializes in keratoconus and scleral lenses and myopia management. So picking a specialty and kind of staying in that lane and really pushing forward on that.
Yeah, I love the specialty stuff. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. It's interesting because as a, kind of a from a marketing vantage point, I always think about how any change, whenever a change happens, any change needs to carry positive with it. And I think you both kind of talked about investing in technology. I completely agree. That's the easiest way to say, well, you're not going to see Dr. Smith, you're going to see Dr. Stybel today, and you're going to see Dr. Stybel with way better gadgets, and it's going to feel like a more sophisticated eye exam. But I wanted to ask both of you because obviously the main doctor sounds like in both of your cases worked themselves out pretty quickly after you took over. And what was it like? I mean, how much? Because I think people worry about this when they buy a practice. They worry that, well, the patients aren't going to be loyal. I'm making an investment, but I'm kind of making an investment in the patient list more than I'm making an investment in the physical place or the chair or whatever. I really care about the patient base sticking around. And if the main doctor that they've been seeing for years and years is working themselves out, is that investment a sound one? What's your take on that? Aaron, you go first.
Yeah. So I know we put out probably one or two different email newsletters to the patient base, just with my picture introducing who I was. And the retiring doctor, he wrote up a paragraph kind of endorsing me and putting his confidence in me and, and stating too that he'll still be sticking around for, another 6 to 12 months, but that they're going to transition some patients over to me as well. I remember many times, and we did this purposely too, but many times he would just come knock on the exam door and say, "Hey, come over. I want you to meet somebody." And so if it was somebody that he felt was important or a long-term patient, I was comfortable just hopping out real quick, going to meet them, shaking their hand, and he would make a joke and, and they'll just tell him that, "Hey, you'll be seeing Dr. Law next year, and he's great, and he's my eye doctor now." And
Yeah.
and I think having staff answer the phone too with that same thing about, yeah, Dr. Stybel's new, but you're going to love him because he's my eye doctor also, and he's fantastic. So,
I
yeah,
like that. That's a great tip, by the way. The "he is my eye doctor." That's a
yeah.
really that's a great tip. What percentage of patients do you think you retained out of the ones that when you bought the practice?
Yeah. So, I would without really remembering a number, it would be easily, I would say, in the mid 80s, somewhere in that range. I would think. I know we did more exams the next year without really adding any more doctor hours because he stepped back enough that I, took on, and we did more exams that next year for sure. And
Hmm.
by then too, I felt like I knew, at least a couple of people every day on the schedule just from being introduced from previously. And I actually joined kind of a local, Rotary club too, as a good way to get my foot in the door with a lot of, the mayors and the superintendents and the, vice presidents of banks and, individuals like that that have a little bit of sway in the community. And,
Nice.
yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So Ryan, what your the previous owner in your practice when you first got it exited a lot quicker, it sounds
Yeah.
like. And so, what was your experience?
Same thing. I think the big thing is sending out a letter, email, whatever you can from the doctor introducing you as the new doctor is huge. But what I found too, and is my transition of getting out of some patient care, that's the worry I have. Well, if I'm not going to see patients, they're not going to want to come to see us. But a lot of people actually like the staff, they like the office. And I think with where we are now and, these days and hours, patients want convenience to their life. So if they need to get their contacts tomorrow, they'll go see the doctor at that practice because they feel familiar. They like the people that are there. Um, so I felt like that was just a big help was having the practice carry what we believed and having that translate. So if the patients knew if they're not coming to see me, they're coming to see our associate, but it's at the same place, giving the same care. And even though it's not me, it's still somebody that works with me or trained by me.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you guys both talk about this. I want to go back to an earlier point about keeping the staff, because there's a fine line between keeping people that folks are used to, and then also recognizing opportunities to improve. When I think about and anyone I've talked to about buying an office, I think generally the advice I tend to hear the most from people who've done it a lot is buy something that's undervalued by its nature. Somebody who's terrible at recall, somebody who's bad at somebody who might have some gaps in patient care, somebody who where it's going to be easier to improve, and you're buying an undervalued asset where you can put in your flavor of doing things the right way, and of course by that virtue increase the value of that asset relatively quickly, right? So simply turning on recall in an office that's not doing recall immediately adds value, and you didn't do much except for maybe pay a marketing company or buy or get a software. And so in my case, as I'm thinking about this question, I always think about walking the fine line of staff, right? Because sometimes an office is underperforming because you just don't have the people who are in it to kind of hit the same vision that you want to hit. Whether it's the number of patients you want to see per hour, or whether it's the specialties and learning something new, you're also going to have. I don't know if you guys had this experience, but I've heard of I can imagine situations where people are saying, well, but that's not the way Dr. So-and-so did it. So, like, do you really want to do that? Because I don't. And I can just hear that voice in my head of that front desk person saying that. So, what's your experience with changing staff and having staff and turnover with staff while trying to keep some of the same, but then also bringing in some new?
Yeah. So going back to one of the previous things about having a better vision and mission for the practice, like had I started with that, you quickly identify the people that are not on board with that, and it's so much easier, especially for the other staff to understand why one staff member is being let go, whether it's 3 or 6 months later or a year later, because they clearly are not on the right bus. They're not going the same direction as where the practice is going, and it's not so much of a, hey, I'm the new owner, I don't like you, you're gone. It's more of a, this is where the business is going, this is our trajectory, and their trajectory is different, and maybe they're just in the wrong office or the wrong field, but I think it helps to identify those staff that maybe do need to move on, because ultimately they're not going to be there and they're not going to support the mission, and you're not going to grow like you normally would.
Yeah.
And in terms of turnover also, it's costly, and we all know that. And I think if you can retain as many as possible, the right ones, then you got to keep focusing on your goals, and you don't get sidetracked about, okay, do we have all the new hire paperwork? Do we fill everything out? Okay, now we have to onboard them, and who's going to do the training? You can keep marching forward with the goals that you have set for the practice.
Yeah. Ryan, your experience with that
Yeah, I
turnover?
think one of the biggest weaknesses I had was holding on to the wrong people for too long. I know
Yeah.
a lot of doctors and business people probably struggle with that. Oh, maybe they'll get better, or I don't know if there's anybody else better that's out there. But once you realize that that person is not a good team member, is not going to move forward, you got to cut the ties and start looking for somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's
And I,
always having an ad out, even if you don't need somebody, because you never know who's going to come across your plate that's got some other experience that you may have not thought was going to fit in your office and really can help you to grow.
okay. So now, where you're at now, 15 more plus years into your careers, what advice or what is one thing or a couple things that each of you wish you knew when you first started your practice? Not when you first started your career, but when you first started wearing the owner hat. And what's something you should have done sooner or done differently based off of what you know now, Aaron?
Yeah. So, I think as new doctors, we all are so focused on making sure we're doing the right tests, that we're interpreting things the right way, that we're scheduling them back the right way. And early on, it's difficult to be confident in your recommendations, and to tell a patient, at least in my community too, where, hey, you need 3 pairs of glasses, and my optician here is going to set you up with 3 today. You're absolutely going to love them. Like, it's hard to be just confident and say, this is what you need. And I think that obviously it would have been a bump, to the top line growth. I think if I had been more confident from the, doors open, but it's hard to have that confidence, going right into it. And then also you kind of don't know all the little tips and tricks, whether your staff answers the phone and ask if there's any other family members that need an eye exam, like little things like that will add an incremental exam or two, to your schedule, sometimes almost on a daily basis. Pre-appointing from the very beginning, getting those first year patients back in on year two, just keeps the growth going.
I love that. And I think those are was your practice doing pre-appointing, by the way, when you joined.
I don't believe so. I don't believe so at the time, if I recall.
And how far into private practice did you start doing pre-appointing?
We probably jumped onto it. You know, I would say joining the power practice back in 2013. Talking through with my consultant at the time, and just trying to take one less headache off the plate. Let's get the established people back in the door. As probably too, is in marketing. Those are the cheapest patient you can get back in the door is your established ones. You don't
Hmm.
have to spend the dollars to recruit them again.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. We might come back to pre-appointing and other, easy wins. Ryan, what do you wish you knew when you started the practice?
Getting the right people around myself that are outside of my practice. So, not a plug for power practice, but joining power practice. And, just like Aaron said, you don't know everything. And you want to focus maybe on the eye exam part of it. So, having people, consultants that can come in and take a look at the practice and figure out areas that are you're going to have growing pains in and where you can improve pretty easily is huge. And then the second would be is charge accordingly. Don't be afraid to invest in technology. Don't be afraid to charge for it. A lot of times we're like, oh, my Optos, we only charge $35. If I bump it up to 40, are we going to lose people for it? And it's like, charge $50 and see what happens. And if you lose them, drop it down to 45. And 10 extra dollars on a patient. If you see 100 patients each month, just do that, cumulatively, how much more that's going to make your practice.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think that's kind of my next point in terms of found money. We talk a lot about actionable strategies that ultimately lead to found money, and you kind of brought up one of my favorite ones, which is just kind of evaluate. Don't play the game of being the financial advisor for your
Mm.
patient. It's not really your job to manage their finances. It's your job to provide them with the best possible care, and that sometimes means that you gotta provide the value, but of course charge for the value that you provide. So, in terms of as your practices grew and as your practices evolved, to get closer to what it is today, what are some of the things where you either raise price or maybe stop dealing with certain types of patients or stop dealing with things that weren't profitable? What are the things that you eliminated in your practice that ultimately made you more profitable?
So I think early on, we eliminated some vision plans that just we all know the plans that just it's not fun. There may be no more no shows. They're not the type of patient that we really see as a part of our vision and future for the practice. Um, I think another thing that kind of stood out early on too, and again, I just didn't know at the time, but we had, 15 progressive lens choices and every AR treatment and, and trying to talk a patient through the selection, it was just like a maze. And then we just go down to two options. This is our best. This is what we go with. And if that's more than they're looking for, here's our next option. Same thing with the densities and AR treatments and the number of contact lens companies we work with is just, sometimes less is more. And people want it to be fast and simple and just make it simple for them. And, I wish, again, that's something I would have done a little bit earlier.
Well, and I think it's twofold, right? Because it's simplicity in the exam lane, it's simplicity for, and we talk about this from a psychology standpoint. When sometimes I mention this in some of my talks, but when we think about it from a marketing standpoint, is too much choice for a patient often creates
Yeah.
choice paralysis, right? If I got too many things, it's not easy for me to make that decision. So I'm going to make no decision, and then I'm going to go
Yeah.
buy my glasses at Walmart or something.
And
But and the other benefit, though, to your point, is as you go down to fewer vendors, you have more buying power with those vendors, so then you can
yep.
negotiate better deals.
Yep. And you get better rebates because your dollars are being spent with one or two companies. But even as simple as having your staff in your EHR, instead of having to scroll down through 75 options and selections, just make it so the drop down and shows you everything and they click it just that much faster. Just little things
Hmm.
like that, doing it 15, 20 times a day over a year, it saves a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's those small incremental changes, but sometimes the big ones. I'm going to come back to insurance plans in a second. Ryan, what about you? What are things that you eliminated over the course of your ownership in your practice, or what are the things you stopped doing that ultimately made you better?
Yeah, one of the big things was Aaron hit on it was the lens options. This is what we offer. We offer the best lens option because that's what we would want to wear. And if they don't want to spend the money for that, okay, here's the generic version of it. But there's two options, and we don't even present the second one at all until the patient, for whatever reason, doesn't want the best option. So it's always just having the least amount of choices for the patient, and then really just we insurance plans. We only take two at our big office, so we've had three or four and dropped down to just two. And I haven't done it yet, but recalling exam onlys, take them off your recall list. Those are patients that you don't need to have them coming in every year if you don't need to, and you have other patients that are going to come in and or patients that don't do optos and OCT. Those are the people who aren't on the same trajectory as you are with your office and wanting to
Yeah.
provide the best care for them.
Yeah, focusing on your most profitable patients makes perfect sense. But I've heard the concern, right? Because your vision plans, for example, uh, are a source of patients, right? So what if I let go of a vision plan and then all of a sudden I now have gaps on my schedule? Well, I would have rather filled those gaps with less profitable patients than necessarily having to accept less revenue. Aaron, what do you say back to a practice that tells you that?
Yeah, so I think you have to do it in the right stepwise fashion. I think you have to have the patient base numbers first as you're building these specialties, as you're recruiting specialty patients from your vision plan, people coming in the door. And at some point, whether through word of mouth, whether just, being an expert in the community in that area, um, it then makes sense that you can start knocking off a few of those vision plans that you don't need because your specialty care, the word of mouth referrals, the internal external marketing, it starts taking hold, and then it starts kind of feeling like it's going to go downhill for you, where it just keeps moving forward. At that point, it's easier as you go.
Hmm. Um, So Ryan, you mentioned you started talking a little bit about specialties, and you added specialties, I'm sure, as you continued practicing. And I will say I got to give you props because you are the first person I've interviewed on the Power Hour that appears to be in a real live exam lane. I know both of you guys see patients, but I assure our audience that if you're watching on YouTube, that is not a fake background. Ryan could reach out and touch that slit lamp right behind him and that phoropter. The so my question to you is, what have you learned about specialties? And when I talk about specialties, I'm thinking, high value or high value, but cash-based services that your practice offers. What have you learned, and what did you wish that you knew?
What I learned is it makes me more passionate about the things I do. So, if you find a specialty that you are passionate about, like myopia, knowing that we can hopefully try to eradicate myopia or at least keep it at the lowest level possible and make a difference in these kids' lives, that's something that I want to go into the office and do every day. But what also you can do is get your office behind that. So if your staff is also all about the specialty that you guys have, that gives them an incentive to come in and see those patients and work a little harder. And then two is just the bottom line. When you don't have insurances that are paying for anything and you can charge your fee for it, it really just helps to grow the bottom line and make your practice much more profitable.
Yeah, but I think some people will say, but it's a waste of time because I bring it up to my patients, and less than 10% want to do it, or less than 5% want to do it, and I'm just wasting time talking about this because it's not really for my patients. What do you say back to those folks?
That's not true. It just may take time for those patients to get on board with it. Just an example today, I've had a young patient, just sticking with myopia. We saw her 2 years ago, educate them about myopia, didn't do anything, came in last year, didn't do anything, came in earlier this year, still didn't do anything. Today, I walk into the office with a note on my desk. Please call this patient's mom. They're finally interested in orthokeratology. And so, yes, it did take 3 years, so it took time, but it's going to take time if you're passionate about it and you show it to patients. That's going to build. But the other thing too is if that patient says no, they may have a brother, a sister, a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, a friend that they may talk about. When they leave the office and they hear something they've never heard before, it may translate into their everyday conversation with somebody else.
Yeah, so it's a numbers game in your mind, and it's
Yeah,
also an understanding that even if it doesn't happen today, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
yeah.
And as your marketer, I just made a note that we probably should be communicating with that patient when they leave. Let's just put a little tag on
We,
that.
we have. There's been zero response back. So it's interesting that they just come in when they need to.
Yeah,
And
eventually, however many messages you have to hit them with, and
yeah,
obviously the message in the chair has the greatest amount of credibility, but maybe they're just maybe they're just not exactly the right
yeah.
messages just yet.
I have no shame. I'll send as many emails and text. And now it's so easy to communicate with people that you can send text, emails, phone
Of
calls,
course, videos. You can send
videos.
people
Yeah.
videos of yourself talking about it every day.
Yep.
Um, Aaron, what's your experience with specialty?
Yeah, so I would say, within probably 3 to 4 years of getting the practice back in 2010, we started into ortho K, we started into scleral lenses, and it is not easy to get started too. But when you start mentioning it, like most importantly, like Ryan said, you have to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate, if it doesn't mean anything, and you're just doing it because you hear everybody else doing it, it's not going to grow nearly at the same rate. And I wouldn't say we're necessarily a big specialty clinic, but between the practices that we have, we do offer the full suite of myopia management. We offer vision therapy as well, and starting to build out dry eye also. So we do have those with different doctors in our practice.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you guys talk about associates building specialties, right? That's an interesting point because you're trying to get them to be more passionate. But how do you motivate somebody? Because it's obviously harder in many cases to, especially with scleral lenses, for example, it's harder to see a patient where there's a non-standard need. And does how do you guys motivate your associates And I know, Ryan, you were saying that you were trying to get your associate to specialize. How has that worked out?
Fortunately, it's working out well now. It does same thing with it takes time, but you got to find something that they're going to be passionate about. Like our
So,
Dr.
did you
Casey.
ask them what they're passionate about, or did you
Yeah,
kind of assign them a specialty?
yeah, no, it's a great question. So when our newest associate, the first thing I said was, "What are things that you like outside of routine optometry?" And she brought up, "I like medical. I like cosmetics." So great, you love cosmetics. We're already doing dry eye treatments like radio frequency and IPL. How can we weave those in? So I do want to find something that they want to do, and then build that around them.
Hmm. Got it. And is it part of their goals? Is it part of their compensation? How do you make sure that they're engaged?
Yeah, we work on production, so they get X amount of percentage of their production. And when you sell a 3,000 dry eye treatment, $3,000 dry eye treatment versus a regular eye exam, that's a big take home for them.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense, right? And again, you have to make sure that you're sharing best practices along the way, right? And so I know in your office you're constantly having conversations about what worked, what didn't work, and how and how that approach is evolving. Do you guys monitor? And Aaron, I'll let you weigh in, chime in on that. Motivating associates to care about specialties.
Yeah, I think it's similar to Ryan. I think when you first start out as well, looking for an associate, if you already have a passion in dry eye treatment or myopia management, then look for somebody who has an interest in something, something else. And I think that's the easiest path is if they are already interested. Um, I think it's important for the listeners too to understand too that you don't have to do everything yourself, nor is that possible because the moment you get this new piece of equipment that you have to pay for, now there's your focus, and now you forget to talk about myopia management and and your attention and your focus and your detail and your success can only be at its best, I think, if you're primarily focused. So I would say bring in someone who already has a passion in an area that you don't have.
Got it. That's great. So I want to give the listeners a little bit of context, and so I think it's important for people to realize that we're not talking about small practices. Your practices may have been small when you first acquired them, but they've grown substantially. So one of the things I want to maybe ask in the way that's easiest for you guys to answer and share whatever specifics you'd like. But I want to hear about your growth trajectory, and I really want to hear about what numbers you're watching and how often are you watching those numbers, and how hard was it to train yourself to care about those particular numbers. Ryan, you go first.
Yeah, our growth trajectory is we want to grow over 10% every year. And as you get into a bigger practice with a high grossing number, it does get a little bit harder to have that exponential growth. So when you're a smaller practice, much easier to grow $100,000, $200,000 and make a huge difference. But basically, really Edge Pro, not a plug for Edge Pro, but I think Edge Pro is a great tool to have because it helps us to monitor patient revenue, clinic revenue, optical revenue. You can do it per staff, and then you can break it down on frames and lenses. So one of the big things we watch for is average frame price. So we want our average frame price to be above a certain number, and we have our goals, and we have our average of what the office is doing, and then where each staff comes in, and then you can work with each staff to say, hey, here's where you're at. How can we get your numbers up? And you're going to see that in your growth, in your goal, your quarterly goal. And then we just take a look at specialties. This is our goal each month. Are we hitting our goals? Are we not hitting our goals? What do we need to do to reach those goals and push forward to grow them?
So you said average frame price and the number or revenue associated with specialty services.
Yep.
What other numbers are you like monitoring like a hawk?
For our new office, it's exams because now we have three. We went from 2 exam lanes to 3 exam lanes. So it's just making, what's our goal? How many exams can we get in each day? We're doing 20-minute exams instead of 30-minute exams. How many medical exams we have versus routine exams.
Got it. And you're looking at that how often?
Almost every day. This is up in my computer.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I, I think it's so important to have that discipline. And I know that there's many people who manage their business by the number of dollars in their bank account. And I was like, well, if there's dollars, then, the business is fine.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of leading indicators that precede that give you the opportunity to steer the ship if you may, as an owner. Aaron, what about you? What do you advise to people that they should be monitoring? What kind of numbers, and also what kind of growth did you experience?
Yeah, so I think the last year, I think we're probably averaging about 10%. You know, similar metrics that Ryan tracks. I think important ones, obviously, are revenue per patient. We track exam onlys as well. So how many patients just come in for an exam and don't actually purchase any products? Trying to keep that low. We of course track recall rate, capture rate, things like that, second pair sales. A lot of the big ones, Edge Pro does it, wonderfully. There's a few different softwares out there that does that for you. We tend right now to kind of do it on a spreadsheet, and that's what I've always done as well. Pulling numbers, throwing them in, kind of averaging things out and seeing how they trend over the year. But like anything, if you measure it, it improves. And if you put the focus in the training and you do the training first, it's going to help the implementation of whatever you're trying to improve as well.
And how often are you looking at the numbers?
Every week, about weekly. I
Okay.
think early on early on you're like every 2 hours and you're like, did it go up? Did it go down where I'm at? But, for the longest time we did weekly meetings. Now we do monthly doctor Zoom calls with all of our doctors. But about weekly though, we're looking at numbers.
Okay, great. And you mentioned exam onlys. What's your suggestion if somebody is having an exam only problem? Maybe
Yeah.
patients walking out the door.
Well, I think at first I'd want to know how are they recommending products? Um, how are they bringing up your supply cells? I think some patients too, they always ask, well, did my prescription change? And the doctor says, well, no, it didn't change at all. Or, it's so small, you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. And I think some patients just want the permission and freedom to get another pair, whether they, it changed or not. It's like, well, oh man, I didn't really like that frame, but my doctor said my prescription didn't change, so I can't do it. So I think doing that and being confident in the second and the third pairs. I think understanding that the conversation you have, how personable you are, what you uncover, talking about their hobbies, talking about their grandkids, things like that, and just making note of that. And doing that like on a little routing sheet too that travels with the patient through the practice, I think is important. So your optician knows what your technician found out, and bringing those things up and talking about the second, third pairs and the importance of yearly eye care, I think is good for patients to hear. And over time you build trust, and as they trust you, they're more likely to, buy from you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any comments on capture rate or exam onlys, Ryan, from your vantage point?
Yeah, I do. I do think for me, it's always been a long-term gain. Like I knew I was buying this practice and I wanted to grow it. I was young at 25 or 26 at the time, and want to have this practice for a long time. So it is being honest with the patients and telling them, hey, your prescription didn't change, but if you want, you got great insurance benefits, and not really pushing it, but at least exactly acknowledging that, hey, if you want to use insurance, you can still get new glasses. So finding that fine line of the trust, because if they don't buy today, I've always had a hard time with exam onlys because I always want to get rid of them. But if you track it, you'll know which patients it is. But maybe they just didn't get glasses today, but they're going to come and get them next year.
Yeah. All right. I mean, it could be an interesting attempt. If it could be an interesting marketing campaign. If you don't buy glasses today, you're never welcome again, because we'll
Again,
never recall you. We're not going to set your future appointment, and we may lock the door next time you show up in our parking lot. Let's see
That
how
would be
that
awesome.
works to reduce exam onlys. Um, all right, so you guys both had, and this is so. There's been a lot of similarities in these conversations, even though you're catering to different types of patients. But I think one of the greatest differences is certainly what you guys did in the last few years, right? Ryan, you bought another practice. Aaron, you sold your practice and joined a larger group. So what's that experience been like for each of you? And maybe Aaron, if I turn to you first,
Yeah.
what did you do to prepare for the sale? How what would you advise somebody who's potentially selling a practice to be thinking about?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if I started 3 to 5 years in advance really, but I think starting 3 to 5 years in advance is the best starting position. Um, making sure that you're being conscious of big purchases, big decisions that are going to carry a loan and a big payment. I think streamlining processes and protocols, making sure your team is all on board, again, that you're all moving in the right direction, the culture and the environment strong. Um, thinking about if someone's going to sell for retirement, thinking about, well, what am I going to do in retirement? What does retirement look like? Thinking about other investments you have, and how much money is your practice sale going to contribute to that? How much do you need out of the practice? Um, and just again streamlining, smoothing things out, preparing documents, making things again as welcoming and as simple as possible for someone to come in as a buyer and say, wow, this is an awesome practice. You know, they got their stuff together. I want this.
Yeah. Um, what did you what decisions would you have made differently if you weren't thinking about selling?
Um, if I would have not sold,
Yep.
I guess the decisions, I think I was heading in a good direction because I came into this decision probably a couple years after COVID, um, and that was obviously rough for all practices. And I think I was, had a pretty darn good year, probably closing out 21. And I
Hmm.
think I was in a good trajectory, at that point. Didn't really have to rely on a lot of the big PPP funds and stuff like that. So it's just again rallying your team and kind of redefining who you are at that time, and continuing to identify what's most important and what's going to keep me, I guess, invigorated for the next 5-10 years.
Sure. Okay. So then, Ryan, in your case, in the last few years, you bought
Yeah.
and you bought another one. And this time, I assume you had more knowledge when you went into to do this, but it also is a really kind of I think a really interesting story of how you did it. I'll let you tell it because I was always impressed by the give first mentality since the first time you told me the story.
Yeah, thank you. So our practice in Manhattan Beach we bought in 2018. The previous owner unfortunately passed away, and it was a tragic accident. And so it was news to all the community, the optometry world in our area. And I was off on Mondays, and I called the practice. I said, "Hey, I'm so sorry to hear. If you need any help, I'm happy to come in on Mondays and see patients and just help you guys out as you transition." And they're like, "That's great. We have two doctors doing it, but nobody on Monday." So I came in on a Monday, and it's in Manhattan Beach. If anybody's spent time in Manhattan Beach, it's a pretty special place. And the patients were great. It reminded me a lot of my current office that I had. And I was able to work there for a couple of weeks and then see what was going to happen with the practice. And fortunately, I was able to take it over. And the
Yeah.
biggest growth for me was, you know, I wanted to see that transformation of the office. It was a little bit of an older office, so there wasn't as much technology there that we had already incorporated and became successful with at our current location. So I said, hey, this is a place that I can come in, and if I can transition it into what I've already built one practice into, I know it's going to make a significant impact both for the practice but for the community.
What was the? I mean, it sounds like you probably weren't the only doctor having the same thought of, okay, I'm going to buy this practice because it's both an opportunity to help the patients, but it's also an opportunity to potentially grow whatever those doctors are doing. What do you think helped you win out over those other doctors?
I think potentially was what I'd already built. So I met with the wife of the deceased optometrist and really sat down and talked to her and told her what my goal was. And she had felt that that aligned with what her husband had been building up for years. And so that was a huge benefit that I had something I could show, and she'd seen the office, and she knew at that point I had two kids, maybe three. Now we have four, lots of kids. So I think she saw that family person, want to build my roots in the community, and that helped.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so, it's fascinating to hear your experiences, guys. And in my, I think a lot of people learn from mistakes. And so to kind of close out the show, I'm going to ask you guys to maybe verbalize a mistake or two that you had made that you really learned from, and that maybe some of our listeners can learn from as well, and just kind of talk a little bit about that. Aaron?
Yeah. So it would probably be to steal from Ryan in terms of, a mistake I probably made more than a couple times early on too is just not getting rid of a team member that really was not bearing fruit to our business and not helping us, succeed. I think,
Firing slow. Yeah.
yeah, because it poisons the culture. And by the time you make the decision, other staff lose a little bit of confidence in their leader. And I think when you can identify who that is first, get rid of them, it only builds the culture, makes a stronger team. And again, it raises the bar for whoever you bring into practice next. And so you're going to be in a much better spot. So, fire quickly.
Okay. Ryan?
Staff, and then also when you invest in any type of technology or frame line, a lot of times these happen because reps come in and they have the new shiny toy that you want, and they're going to give you a deal if you sign on today. Is really
Yeah.
doing your due diligence to understand, how am I going to make this payment? How am I going to grow it? How are we going to keep growing with this? And it's going to actually set our practice apart. So it's not just jumping on like, hey, I kind of want this. It's a good deal. Let me buy it right now. Not the
What do you mind me asking what
impromptu.
you bought that you wish you wouldn't you wish you wouldn't have at the time, or maybe you would have done your research a little bit more?
Truthfully, fortunately for me, it's been frame lines where like
Ah,
my opticians are like, "Don't get this; it's not going to sell." And I was like, people ask me about it in the exam room, and then not really knowing what they ask them about outside in the optical. So it's been a few frame lines that I've invested in.
mm,
Fortunately, the technology has always worked out because I sit there and say, okay, it's going to cost me this much money. This is our monthly nut. How many patients are we going to have to see to actually make that? Do we have the volume for it? And then taking the 2-3 months to talk to patients about it before you do it to make sure that they're there.
yeah. Well, the frame line's probably not the
Not the
most
biggest thing.
dangerous
Yeah.
mistake to make. Yeah. And you learn quickly, and then you just get somebody else who will
Know your role,
buy
right?
out the
That's not what I'm
inventory.
going to do.
Yeah, right. All right, guys. Well, it's been such a pleasure learning from you, hearing about your experience, and just hearing both the similarities and the differences. I'm really glad we did this in a panel interview type of style. Any other parting thoughts? Anything else? Any other nuggets you want to drop to our listeners today?
If you're passionate about doing it again, keep the passion and go for it. Don't be afraid to do it. Just do your research ahead of time and know where you're going.
Yeah, well said, Aaron.
Yeah,
Ryan?
never be complacent. Always push forward. If we're not growing, we're dying. So it's, what's next? What can we do to better our practice, better our patient care, and that will help you to grow.
All right, well said. And it's a pleasure having you guys both on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you.
If you're enjoying the Power Hour, you might be asking yourself, what can I do today in my practice that's going to make an impact? So, over the years, the practice coaches and consultants at the Power Practice have helped thousands of practices improve. And they often start with one thing, and that's a proprietary methodology called the Practice Profitability Audit. For about $2,400, they look at all of your practice numbers and they stack them up against where a practice of your size could and should be. It takes about a week for them to do. And because they're so experienced, they know what your potential looks like. And they're often able to take that $2,400, multiply it several times over, and hand it right back to you in found profits in your practice in months, not years, in months. But you get to keep the much more profitable practice for years afterwards. But here's the best news. I'm going to tell you how you can have the practice profitability audit completely free. See, we're really trying to get people onto the show website, which is, by the way, powerpractice.com. And then you click the Power Hour podcast button. The reason we want you there is because I want the audience participation. I want to hear your feedback, and I want to know how to make the show better for you. So you can interact with us, send us your feedback, offer your suggestions. And for a limited time, when you go there, you can also request a practice profitability audit for free. Right. We're going to cover 100% of the cost, but only for 5 people per month. And 5 people per month is all we really have capacity for, because this is a resource intensive audit and the power practice coaches are generally busy serving their clients. But for 5 people a month, they've agreed to cover 100% of the cost. So it's totally free to you. So again, take action immediately in your practice. Go to powerpractice.com, click on the Power Hour podcast, interact with us, but also request a practice profitability audit today.